is that we have 3 Velon ships outside of our solar system. They can't get in. Now, there are 3 million Velon on these ships, and they are deliberately being held out by the Guardians. Basically, the solar system does not want them in the solar system. The Earth doesn't want them in the solar system. Nobody wants them in the solar system. And so the ones who are in here are have been around for a while, quite some time. And so this is a deliberate attempt to build a black hole to open a gateway through the solar system to allow these Velon ships in. And this is what I think CERN was built for. The particle accelerator in CERN was a deliberate attempt again to try and create enough energy on Earth to create a black hole. But this is what people are thinking is, because don't forget the propaganda from the Velon or from the Anunnaki through an organization called Ashtar Command. You come across Ashtar Command? Well, they say they have thousands of cloaked ships within our solar system waiting to lift us off the planet to save us so that we can move to another planet. That's another load of bollocks. So where we can safely ascend to the 5th dimension. So basically it's depopulating the Earth, which goes along with the Georgia Guidestones thing of reducing the population to 500 million. So the slave race of 500 million left on Earth. Everybody else is taken off the Earth. As far as I can see, dumped into space, because there isn't another planet out there that we can live on. And this is what these wormholes are for, and what these spiral, the Norwegian spiral and the other 2 are for, is to make people believe that wormholes and black holes are being created so that we have this fleet of ships within the solar system. And so basically what the pre-1900 you had the Eugenics Society set up to try and create the perfect human. So they tried to make that a law so that they had control of who reproduced. So if you were thick, you couldn't reproduce. If you were black, you couldn't reproduce. If you were disabled in any way, you couldn't reproduce. And they were trying to create laws to make that happen, within America in particular. The headquarters of the American Eugenics Society is on Long Island, and the building which was their headquarters was the headquarters of the Human Genome Project.
So is the Human Genome Project an associated DNA?
Yes, the thinking behind it is that they are trying to create a perfect human. And this is what GM crops are all about. They started with crops because genetically manipulating plants is far less complex than manipulating animals. But they've moved on to animals. This is why you began cloning Dolly the sheep and all the rest of it.
Well, if we have an immediate now, currently in 2010, we have these 100 cows who have cloned cows, and we have cattle mutilations and stuff like that.
Well, no, the mutilations are a little bit different. All the research I've done into that, and I know they're connected with UFOs and all the rest of it, but the majority of cattle mutilations are actually carried out by the Americans themselves, partly for testing of sort of cattle diseases, and partly because of genetic research. It's got nothing to do with UFOs. Why the only people who've been doing aliens who've been doing anything in terms of human genetic research are the Greys and the Blues, and they're only interested in the human body. They're not interested in animals or anything else. So why on earth would they go around mutilating animals and leaving them lying around?
So what about the military facilities in Britain involving the generated life forms?
The worst thing we have at the moment is that 2 years ago an American genetics company created an artificial life form. It's a bacteria at the time. So literally they splice together a load of genes and the thing lives and it reproduces. And it was announced by the lab that did it to say how wonderful they were, and they were immediately shut down by the military, and all the people working there were taken into military control. So You know, you've got that side of it. Then you've got the genetic manipulation to soldiers to make them super soldiers and all this sort of stuff.
How do you know much about that program, the Super Soldier program?
Not a great deal. Again, I'm basically under 24-hour psychic watch. If it's not by the VLON, it's by the NSA. And so it's difficult sometimes to get out there and look at things.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, just out psychically, I'm watched all the time. You know, to get that book out, the Human Extinction book, I was permanently under psychic attack all the time. Now, the majority of psychic attack is done by the NSA, and the NSA abduct children who have psychic potential, and they put them together in groups of 10 in underground wards, strap them to the bed, stuff them full of tubes to keep them alive, and they force them into psychically attacking people, or creating psychic protection around the Gulf, let's say, or the dark side of the moon. So I tried having a look.
What would you want to do in the dark side of the moon?
Well, there's a permanent base up there that's been there since the 1950s that's co-run with the Americans and the Russians. It was done using UFO technology.
Is that the German flying disc technology?
No. Well, I mean, you've got to wonder where some of that come from, I have to say. But, no, Roswell.
Do you think that the Germans had ET involvement?
Well, don't forget, the Eugenics Society was supporting the Americans. It was supporting the Germans. And an awful lot of technology and money went from America to Germany to support Hitler. And, you know, the Bush family made their fortune by supplying stuff to Hitler. And I suspect, I know the Roswell crash was 47, but there's obviously been an awful lot of observation of UFOs over the years, and recognizing them as flying discs. I suspect that as the Germans had massive research and build facilities in Peenemünde, that the Americans supplied all of this kind of information for them. I mean, there is some evidence that the first contact between the Greys and the Americans was 1928, not Roswell at all.
I think Roswell's been used as a big distraction.
Well, it's true, it did happen. But given the VLON connection with the Illuminati, who knows what technology the VLON have passed on.
What about the UK?
Not so much the UK, because, you know, in fairness, the British actually kept themselves separate from the Illuminati for a long time. So although they were influenced by it, in overall terms, British politics remained comparatively clean.
What about the concept of foreign relations, the Queen, I mean, David Icke's...
Well, and I know this thing about the reptilian look. There's another story behind that, which has got nothing to do with the VLON, but it is alien related. And so again, it depends on how complicated you want to get. Because there's, you know, this is really where it gets into the bizarre, is because a race of beings that managed to build a wormhole that linked our universe and their universe together. So these beings are not even of this universe. And they came in bringing with them energy patterns that allowed them to remove freedom of choice. Now, our universe is built, literally everything, all the energy patterns within this universe are built around the concept of freedom of choice. And you cannot be in a position where you can remove freedom of choice. And this is what this other race from this other universe, called the 14th Faction by the Akashic, this is what they brought with them, were energy patterns that they could remove freedom of choice. The destruction caused within our universe by this race is vast. About a quarter of the universe's resources disappeared because of this race. Because if you bring with you energy patterns that can remove freedom of choice, how can you deal with it? You can't. And so it took many thousands of years to actually get to the point where we could evict these people. Now, the problem is they brought with them a legacy, and as far as I can work it out, something like 30,000 souls on the way to Earth got caught in the crash when the wormhole opened. And they became infected with energy patterns that allowed them to remove freedom of choice. And so there were at varying times, there were 30,000 people within this universe who were capable of doing that. The first instance we saw of it on Earth was Alexander the Great. Because he was somebody he was the first conqueror, essentially. Everybody else before that had been, localized squabbles sort of thing, or water supplies or whatever. But he was the first one who set out to conquer people, and he had these 14th faction frequencies built within his system. And so at varying times, there's never been 30,000 on the planet at one time, never more than usually a few hundred. But they brought with them these frequencies capable of doing that. And this race that came in from the other universe is reptilian in form. The humanoid, but reptilian features. And so Ike isn't wrong in that, in the basic story. It's just that they're nothing to do with the Velon. And also this race was destroyed and totally removed from the universe, and their energy patterns removed from the universe. In the way in which time is bizarre, but in the way in which it relates to Earth, it was about 2003. I think it was, something like that it happened with us on Earth. So all the energy patterns that they brought with them have been removed. George Bush Sr., for example, exhibited some elements of that energy when he stood up and said, we're going in to fight the Gulf War, and everybody went, yeah, we're going to fight the Gulf War. And then when George Bush Jr. turned around and said, we're going to fight the Gulf War, everybody looked at him and said, why? Whereas George Bush Sr. had enough of the 14 energies within his system to be able to force people into accepting what he said. So it's immensely complex, or at least that is a complexity within the story which really is a bit beyond the Illuminati and the Velon, because the Velon were not affected by the 14th faction energies, and the Illuminati have not been affected by the 14th faction energies. But there have been 14th faction energies at work on Earth, which potentially aided the Illuminati in their plans.
So how do ordinary people wake up and defend against what is becoming a very serious issue?
The 14th faction you can't. Well, they've gone in anyway, so that's not an issue.
How did they get fought? How did the universe, or how did they get expelled?
Well,
what do we need to know in order to do this? If it have to?
No, it's done. It's done. It's cleared. The universe is clear of those energies. I mean, to give you a good example of how these energies are clearing, black holes did not exist. The way in which Stephen Hawking described black holes. They do not actually exist. Did not exist before the 14th faction turned up. But now that the 14th faction have been removed, they're having to rewrite the books about black holes because black holes are collapsing. They're disappearing. They're just collapsing in on themselves, and all the stuff that they collected within them over the last couple of centuries, whatever, is actually being ejected back out. This is, what's the name of that woman who gave that talk at AV4 on black holes? All the ejection spikes that are coming out. That's the stuff being ejected, that's been collected into the black hole, is being ejected back out again as the black hole collapses. So the universe is not based on black holes in any shape or form. I don't care what these bloody scientists talk about, it's a load of bollocks again. So they're collapsing and they're disappearing. So all of that influence, all of the problems created by the 14th faction is gone, totally gone. The universe had to find a way of creating energy patterns that did not exist within this universe before the 14 arrived. So the way you remove something is you create an energy pattern that is equal opposite to the problem you're dealing with, to the energies that you're dealing with. So that's why it took a long time to deal with the 14th faction, is because how can you create an energy from nothing? Because the components of that energy don't exist within this universe. So it was a major problem to remove these characters out of the universe, but it was done. But the Velon have not been influenced by the 14th faction, and there are no longer any 14th faction energies available on Earth either. So in many respects they have no connection with what's going on with the Velon and the Illuminati.
So why are you under attack for writing about human extinction?
Well, the Velon don't want it out there. Neither do the Illuminati. I mean, in bless his cotton socks, David Icke's been doing an amazing job for 30 years trying to get as much of this information out there as possible. I think he's wrong about a lot of things, and I think there's a reason why he's wrong about a lot of things, but the core material he talks about, I think, is a basic truth to it. And particularly his chasing the Illuminati, and he's under attack a lot of the time, I suspect, because otherwise his work would be much more accepted. But because I work on a psychic level, I'll go and look at these things. Now, when would it be? About 13 years ago, I got psychically attacked, and I went to have a look at what was going on. Why was I being attacked, and who was doing it, sort of thing. And I tracked down an underground base under the Nevada desert, which is using alien technology to enhance human psychic potential, to attack people. The installation they built has massive potential within it. They hold records of 100,000 people in one little machine, so that all the operator has to do is think about that person, and the full details come into his head. And that can then be used to project towards that person to create them problems. So I went to have a look at this, and what I did was added a little more energy than the machinery was used to, shall we say. And it blew the installation up. And the following night, we were living in Exeter at the time, the following night the house got entered and I was injected with a radioactive isotope. Because I woke up with a hypodermic puncture mark in my arm, which I had checked out by a couple of other people to confirm that I wasn't just imagining things. And I've been under attack ever since, essentially, because I found a way of counteracting the isotope in the body. Because what it was designed to do was to give me terminal liver cancer. I'd have been dead within 6 weeks if I couldn't have done anything about it. So it's for little events like that that I'm under psychic attack all the time. And of course then to try and write a book like that and try and get all that information out there, and the other books which have gone through much of human history, because they don't want real human history out on the streets. They don't want that made public because it counteracts the Anunnaki story and the scientific story and the creationist story. So they don't want those out, and so but I want to find out what it is. I want to find out what these things are and what's going on and why it's happening, who's done what to who and all the rest of it. And the only way of doing that is to do it psychically. And so they don't like me doing it, basically.
So can you just give a brief synopsis of each book?
Oof, no.
A couple of words. What does the
really.
title, what's its basic intent?
Okay, the first book was The Journey Home. And what that really looked at was we had a massive energy shift occur on the planet in 1996. So it starts with 1996 and then goes on to explain some of the fundamentals of how we're constructed, how the humans are put together, and how um, the higher self, physical self-division and this sort of thing, how that works. Then the second book was called The Fool's First Steps, which looks more towards Earth mysteries like Stonehenge, crop formations and this sort of thing. And the third book, Planet Earth, the Universe's Experiment, really looks at an overall picture of human history. But I hadn't tracked down the Velon by that time, but what I did in the Planet Earth book was to go through the 14's faction history and explain about all of that. Then there's the Universal Soul, which really just is more a bit of everything. So there's a bit of human history and there's a bit of Earth mystery stuff, and that's the first one I got into the Velon with, and put in some of the drawings of some of the some of the stuff I'd found in people's systems, the implants. And the same then with the human soul. I went into again a bit more. So really, each book is a development, if you like. So each bits and pieces I found out and gone into greater depth of things, then I've put into the books. And then the Human Extinction book is, if you like, putting the whole story together. So it goes into the human history and how the Illuminati were formed and how they were taken over by the Velon and the Anunnaki. As I say, I got a new book coming out in a few weeks, which highlights, if you like, the Anunnaki plan, how the Anunnaki plan works, where it originated, how it originated, and then comparing it to the human plan, what I would call the human plan, what we're really doing on Earth. And so really it's trying to bring the whole of human history up to date, and to put it within the context of 2011-2012. We got a huge amount of disinformation and propaganda about 2012 because people are picking up on this 2012 date in the Mayan calendar. You know, we got movies like 2012, which basically saying the world's going to fall apart and totally disintegrate in 2012, which is a complete load of rubbish. What the 2012 date is all about, the Mayan calendar isn't the only calendar on the planet. There's an Egyptian calendar, Chinese, Celtic, Native American, they all have calendar systems. And all of them come to a conclusion end of 2011 running into the end of 2012. And the reason for that is that humanity as a whole, set up what I would describe as the human plan. Now this came into being 7,000 years ago, and we set ourselves a 7,000 year time limit to complete this process of planning. And all the plan is it's very, very simple. We need, as I said, on Atlantis we had the whole soul within the body. And essentially ever since then we haven't had the whole soul within the body. And what the purpose of the human plan is to find out how we get the whole soul back into the body. And we found the answer to it. That's what it comes down to in the end. And again, it's to do with energy patterns. The Earth, in order to create physical life and physical existence, generates a base energy signature of 7.56 cycles per second, 7.56 hertz. This is the frequency Tesla was using, for example, for his free energy experiments that he did, was tapping into the Earth's own energy bands, which is this 7.56 hertz. But the problem with 7.56 hertz is that it is too low a frequency to maintain the whole of the soul within the body. It's just that fundamental energy problem. That's all it is, ultimately. And what it needs to be is much higher than that, because essentially the energy contained within the soul is immense. I mean, we're talking the average soul contains an energy potential that encompasses 50 dimensions. I would describe a dimension as being a band of energy, a bit like a radio dial. So you have frequency stops along the way. So a dimension is an energy, is a way of measuring energy at a level that encompasses all the frequencies that went before that particular band, and the next dimension then contains all the energies that are above that particular band. So the soul itself contains 50 dimensions as an average, which means this concept that we're moving into a fifth dimension is a complete load of rubbish, and again is fabricated by the Anunnaki to mislead us. So what we're trying to do is get this whole soul back into the body. We're not ascending anywhere, we're not going anywhere, we're staying on Earth. Otherwise, that's the whole purpose of Earth. Why would we want to go anywhere else, for God's sake? And so that 7.56 Hertz signature level was too low, and in 2002 the Earth altered her own signature level from 7.56 Hertz to 3.5 kilohertz. And everything has changed since. The chakras within the body have changed colour. You can't alter frequency without altering colour. Nobody on the planet has the traditional red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, rainbow colours of the traditional chakra colours. That's gone. Nobody has those colours. Most people have an intermediary set of colours, which are copper golds, petrol blues, petrol greens, and transparencies. By transparency, I mean pure energy, energy without a colour. Like a heat haze shimmer you get on a hot day. Then there are millions of people worldwide who have no colours to the chakras at all. They're just pure energy. And there are millions more people on the planet who don't have any chakras at all, because the reason for having chakras is very specific. And if you bring sufficient soul energy into the body, then you don't need the chakras any longer. So they've gone. Many millions of people worldwide do not have any chakras. And currently, this is mid-2010, something like 4.5 million people on Earth have undergone their full soul transition. In other words, they've brought the whole of the soul back into the body. Now you won't see these people because they are living in isolated communities in isolated spots. Let's face it, if you were wandering around the streets with that kind of energy emanating from your body, you'd be turned into a new religion. Or you'd be taken in for experimentation by the military. Which is what did happen, in fact, in America. A small group in America, they were the very first people to undergo this transition process. And they were immediately arrested and taken into custody for experimentation by the American military. And they're still held on one of the American Air Force bases. And the experimentation they've been put under is worse than anything we saw under Hitler. Believe me, it's horrendous what they've tried to do into these people's bodies.
Can you go to details?
But they knew that it was going to happen. So basically what they did was to volunteer, if you like, to be taken in to undergo this treatment, in the hope that others who are going through this process wouldn't have to undergo it themselves. Two people have actually died. 2 of these people have died. Now that should not happen, because if you have the whole soul in the body, your natural lifespan is somewhere in the region of 1,500 years. People on Atlantis lived 2,000 years if that's what they chose to do. So the kind of experimentation is, yes, inject the body with just about any chemical you can think of to see if the body can throw it off. Inject the body with any disease you can think of, or even some of the engineered diseases, to see if the body can throw it off. How much electricity can the brain take? This kind of experimentation. And it's been going on for some years. And, it's still going on. But as I say, progressively, more and more people are undergoing this final transition of bringing the whole soul into the body.
How do they recognise that?
Oh, because there is no comparison. It's very, very difficult to describe what it's like to have those kinds of potential. because let's face it, we don't have the vocabulary to explain what it is like to be psychic, what it is like to communicate with a blade of grass, with a raindrop, with a wild animal, with each other, without the need for language. What it's like to be able to think. Let's use the example of remote viewing. So, say you want to go and you're walking down the street one day and you decide to yourself, I'd love to eat an orange. So what you do is you remotely view an area where oranges grow, and you think yourself to the tree where the orange is. And what you do is you take the body with the thought, a process called translocation. You can then pick the orange off the tree and return by the same process back to where you started from. That's the kind of potential and abilities that these people have. It's phenomenal. We do not have the vocabulary to describe the kind of abilities that these people have in how they deal with everything that is on the planet. And this is what we should be. This is what humans should be. This is what we're designed to be, and what everything we have ever done on this planet in 85,000 years has been leading up to us being, is to everybody to have those kinds of potential. And everybody can do it. There's no block, nobody standing in judgment anywhere and saying, you can't do this because you're a bad person. There's no such thing. If anybody wants to do it, they are perfectly capable of doing it. But this is what the Anunnaki are trying to stop, and what the Illuminati are trying to stop.
Because we would be more powerful than they would be.
Yeah, we would throw them off the planet immediately. We would get rid of the Velon immediately. They would have no control over us whatsoever. And the Illuminati would cease to have any kind of control over anybody who has those abilities. Because you cannot be contained, you cannot be controlled if you don't want to be. Because the human potential is astronomical. As I say, we don't have the vocabulary to describe how we are. I mean, there's an expression I used in one of my books, which was that if you think of our five senses, touch, sight, hearing, smell, whatever, they're like single notes compared to a symphony that is true understanding of the world and what our potential and our abilities actually are. So we've confined ourselves quite deliberately into this sort of minimal space that we inhabit in the body, and we're ready to break out of it. Excuse me. We're ready to break out of it again, so that we become, at long last, a full human being back on the planet. And this is what the Illuminati are trying to stop. They are trying to stop people fulfilling that potential. I mean, for example, the American military announced a few months ago that they were using HAARP to flood the planet with extra low-frequency waves. And ostensibly the reason they gave was to uncover underground secret bases by Al-Qaeda, because ELF is ground penetrating radar, basically. The real reason for doing this is to counteract the Earth's shift in frequency from 7.56 Hertz to 3.5 kilohertz. That's what it's there for. That's what they're flooding the planet with. And also it is trying to affect people's ability to change consciousness levels, because it's trying to slow down the frequencies of the body to stop us undergoing this kind of change and solar reintegration process. They're using HAARP to create these sky spirals, like the one in Norway in December, and two others, I understand, one in, I think it was Russia, and the other in China around about the same time. And there's also this phenomenon that's coming about that people are describing as wormholes. They're all HAARP generated quite deliberately to make us believe that aliens are entering our solar system and the planet and the orbit around the planet, because Ashtar Command, which is one of the Anunnakis, made up groups along with the Galactic Federation. They're all made up by the Anunnaki and the Hathor to make us believe that we cannot complete this process on Earth. We must leave the Earth. And therefore all these ships are arriving because the Anunnaki are such wonderful people, to take us off the planet and transport us somewhere else. Where they're going to take us, they haven't specified yet. But believe me, there is no planet in the universe that is capable of supporting human life, because Earth is unique in that respect. And therefore anybody who steps onto one of these ships isn't going anywhere other than dead. It's as simple as that. And this is what these sky events are there, I believe, to make us believe, is that there are a load of ships arriving to help us ascend to the fifth dimension, which again is something the Velon have come up with. We are not ascending anywhere. We're doing the exact opposite. We are bringing the whole of the soul into the body. And this thing about the fifth dimension is also a load of rubbish, because the soul already contains 50 dimensions. Why on earth would we limit ourselves to 5? So that's the whole process that's going on at the moment, is to try and prevent humanity as a whole undergoing this change and fulfilling our potential and becoming human again.
And that's going to be done by October 28th, 2011?
Well, the Mayan calendar is slightly confusing. I mean, there's, you got all those tons, bactons and rounds and whatever it is mixed into it. I've never studied the calendar, so I can't speak about it in detail. But what I do understand is that within the 5 suns of the cycles are events called epochs. And these epochs are markers, if you like, along the way up to 2012. Now, large changes have taken place in human history at the end of each epoch, like the Second World War or the end of the Roman Empire, that kind of thing. And the last epoch within the calendar ends on the 27th of October 2011. Now, as far as the Akashic is concerned, this human plan comes to a completion at the end of 2011 and not 2012. What I think the calendar does is to say there is this time period, a little bit of a leeway within the time period between the end of 2011 and the end of 2012 for us to get our act together. So the 21/12/12, the 21st of December 2012, as the main calendar ends, it says, right, that is the absolute completion date for the 5th sun, and then we move into a 6th sun. Essentially, the whole cycle begins again, which means, in overall terms, essentially, humanity becomes humanity. We become proper human beings again, and not the subhumans we've been for the last 7,000 years.
So how do we accomplish that if people are
in many ways,
or they're under attack, or what essential guide would you give to people to help in that process in the next year or so?
Well, my view is that I think the idea of going out on the streets and rioting against these sort of new laws and restrictions that have been imposed on us over the last few years by various governments, going out and having street revolution against it, is probably a pointless exercise. Because there are so many new prisons having been built over the last few years, and laws are in place where people can be held without charge indefinitely. So if you go out in the streets and riot, what's going to happen is you're going to get arrested, shoved into prison and forgotten about. So I don't think that's an answer to anything. And really, the answer to the way in which we complete this process can only be internal, because it is an internal process. What we're doing is bringing the soul back into the body, bringing the higher self down into the body. And so it can only be done on an individual level. I mean, that's the whole point of being an individual, is that we can only do it for ourselves. Nobody can do it for us. Nobody is going to turn up and say, well, you've struggled hard, good for you, so we'll help you out. because that's not going to happen. That's not the point of being human and not the point of the human plan. So basically the first thing to do is to make a decision for yourself. Are you going to undergo this process of change or aren't you? It's as simple as that. If you choose that you are, then it must be a very sincere choice, because you must be prepared to work at it, because there's work we need to do to get ourselves ready to undergo this process. Now, once you have made that decision and you make sure that you really do believe that you're going to do this and are determined to do it, and the next stage is just that. Sit down quietly one day, and when you've made this decision, and say to yourself, with as much intent, positive intent, as you can inject into the statement, is to say to yourself, and also by doing that what you're doing is saying to your higher self, is that I want to complete this process. I want to undergo this process of soul reintegration. I want to stay on Earth. And after that, what will happen is that your higher self will find ways to help you to sort out the problems that you have in your life that need sorting out. Not all problems you have in your life require sorting out. But what I mean by problems is things like, what we're doing is bringing the higher self into the body. We are increasing the amount of soul energy we contain within the body. And in order to do that, we need to make some space. And so what we need to do is to get rid of all the emotions we've accumulated over this lifetime. Now, everybody accumulates emotions. We never express ourselves properly. Everybody's found themselves in situations where their mothers told them they need to do something. And instead of shouting back at your mother, I'm not doing that, that's your life, it's not mine, we don't say anything. And all of that angst gets stored in the body. And daily, if you're out working and you've got a boss, and your boss says, do this, and you want to tell him where to get stuffed, and you can't, or you're going to get sacked. The same thing again, we store that emotion away within the body. So what we need to do is to clear all of these accumulated emotions out. And the best way of doing that is to use an old technique. It's Native American originally, but the technique is very simple. And what you do is you get yourself a newspaper, an old newspaper, and a pencil. And what you do is to start writing to the people who have made you angry, made you annoyed, frustrated, whatever it is. And you write to them on the newspaper. But you don't read it back. That's the important thing, is you don't read it back. Because if you read it back, what you're doing is taking all the emotion back into the body. So you need to get it out. We need to clear the body out. So by writing it on newspaper, it's physically impossible to read it back, because you're writing in pencils. You can't actually read what you've written. So once you've finished a piece of writing to your mother, your boss, great aunt, LCO, whoever it is, makes no difference. Is just rip it up and get rid of it. Burn it if you can, but otherwise just get rid of it. But rip it up into little pieces, so that what you're doing is getting the emotion out. And once you've finished writing that, if you think back on what you've just written, and you still feel angry or whatever the emotion is connected with it, then you know that you need to write again, because you haven't cleared that situation out of your system. Your system isn't clear enough yet, so you need to do more writing over that situation. Rip it up again and get rid of it. It's when you can think back on events that have occurred in your life, and you can see them as events without any emotional upsurge attached to that event, then you know that you have cleared the emotion out of your system. And essentially that's all you really need to do, is the statement of intent and the clearance of old emotional debris out of the body. It's as simple as that. Now, I know people don't like simple answers. I mean, humans, God bless us, like everything as complicated as possible. Unless it's complicated, it can't work. It never does work that way. The simplest answer is nearly always the correct answer, and the easiest way to do something. And this giveaway process sounds like it cannot possibly work until you try it. And then you realize just how much rubbish you're hanging on to and have held on to all of your life. You'll find stuff coming back from childhood that you thought you had dealt with, but you haven't. It's there, it's still there. You think about it, and it creates an emotional response within your body even now. Using this process will clear that out, and the more rubbish emotional debris that you clear out, the more of the soul you can take in. The more of the soul you take in, the more rubbish you can clear. So it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle eventually. Until eventually what you have is the highest whole of the higher self back within the body. And then at that point, everything changes. The world changes totally, because your view of the world changes, your interaction with the world changes, your interaction with people changes, everything changes. Let's say there's 4.5 million people already completed this process, and they're finding that they communicate with wild animals, so they don't have a fear of wild animals anymore. Because after all, most of these people do live in isolated communities, traditional tribal communities such as Darkest Africa, South America, whatever it is, where they are away from centres of population. And but this is what they're finding. They can move things around psychically. They can communicate to each other psychically. They know somebody who is approaching their region, because they can pick up their thought forms psychically, and so they can hide, or they can put psychic barriers around themselves so people physically can't see them. So everything changes. Once we reach that point, we are not as we are now, we are so much more, and this is what the human plan is all about, what the last 7,000 years is all about, and what our development is all about, is arriving at the point where we take on board all of these abilities that we actually have. And what the Illuminati and the Anunnaki are trying to do is to stop us from achieving this.
How do we recognize somebody like that? If we had a Valon or an Anunnaki person in our workplace, or we encountered them, or somehow, how do we recognize it, how do we deal with it, and how do we survive it?
Well, first of all, it's really not much of a problem, I have to say, because there are very, very, very few Velon in human form. I mean, we're talking a maximum of something like 250.
What about the ones which aren't in human form but still have enough?
Well, the ones that aren't in human form are essentially invisible to us.
Can they affect us?
Well, they can to a certain extent, but it would have to be a determined effort on their part, because the method that they've chosen to work with is through the Illuminati. And of course the Illuminati control the Bilderbergers, all organizations like the World Health Organization, the World Bank, the United Nations, virtually every government on the planet is controlled by the Illuminati through organizations like the Bilderbergers and the Trilateral Commission, all this sort of stuff. These are all just structure within
control.
So through that control,
it affects us all very
It does, very much so.
So how do we deal with that?
Well, this is what I'm trying to say, is that, most people's natural reaction to find out that how the British government's been manipulated, for example, into signing the Lisbon Treaty. The Lisbon Treaty, the implications of the Lisbon Treaty are horrendous in terms of personal freedom in Britain, or any country that has signed the Lisbon Treaty. But it's actually written into the Lisbon Treaty, and it says that if you criticise the Lisbon Treaty, you can be imprisoned without charge, indefinitely. So how are you going to get around that? I mean, we can rely on the French, I suppose, possibly the Germans, to have street riots. I mean, the French are superb at that. I mean, they won't take rubbish, and they fight back. And good for them. I wish more people did. But under the kinds of laws that have been passed in these countries over the last few years, since the likes of Bush and Blair have been in power, it means that people will just get rounded up and herded off into detention centres and held without charge. I mean, the country that has the most riots, for example, is China, but we never hear about it. But what the Chinese have done since Tiananmen Square and all the protests by Western countries about personal freedoms and everything, they've issued personal identification cards which contain what they call RFID chips. Now these are radio frequency identification things. So basically, instead of arresting people at riots like they always used to do, which caused all the problems with the West, is they have policemen who walk amongst the crowds who have RFID chip readers. And so they know the identity, name and address, and all the personal details that are stored in their cards about every single person that is in that particular riot. And so they don't have to arrest people en masse at these riots, because they got all their details. They just quietly go around the houses and pick them up at night. And that's how the Chinese have got away with it. The reason why the Western countries like America and Britain dropped the idea of personal identification cards is because they couldn't make them work properly. And the original idea was that they would produce a card that was satellite trackable, so that every single person that carried one of these cards could be tracked wherever they went in the world, literally. But the technology isn't there. They couldn't make a card small enough to contain that kind of traceable chip. So they dropped the idea of personal identification cards. What they've done instead is switch to cars. This wonderful British thing that Peter Mandelson came up with, and we give everybody a tax rebate of £2,000 if they buy a brand new car. The reason is that the computer in the car has the technology that has a transponder fitted to it, which means you're identifiable by satellite tracking. Every single car on the road that is less than 10 years old is trackable by satellite. And not only does it carry these transponders, it carries an immobilizer. And the police carry computer units within their cars that will immobilize your car, if that's what they choose to do. And that's the reason for encouraging people to have brand new cars, is because they contain this technology.
And that's, of course, where climate change comes in with the carbon lobby.
Well, the climate change, again, is another complete rubbish. It's a total hoax. If you look back over climate history, of global history of climate change, what you find is 2,000 years ago, global temperatures were an average of about 3 degrees above freezing. We know this because the Romans wrote about growing grapevines on Hadrian's Wall that produced an extremely drinkable red wine, which means to grow grapevines on Hadrian's Wall means that the global temperature must have been about +3 degrees. Now, I know it doesn't sound very much +3 degrees, but don't forget we're talking average global temperatures. So we've got a temperature range of, let's say, something like -60 at the North Pole, +60 at the equator, and then -60 at the South Pole. So you average all those out, and the average global temperature in theory should be 0. But it never is. Well, it never is exactly 0. So if we go back 2,000 years, we find that the temperatures were about +3. They then dropped a bit and then rose again, and we ended up in a period which the scientists call the medieval warm period. Now, this lasted from, I can't remember the exact dates, but I know that it ended towards the end of the 1300s. And the temperatures then were about +2. From the end of the 1300s, the temperature started to drop, and in 1480, the average global temperature became 0. But the temperatures continued dropping, and they went down to about -1.5. And they remained that way until the early 1800s. So between about 1500 and 1800, you had 300 years where the global temperature was 1.5 degrees below freezing. It's what the scientists called the mini ice age. And then around about 1800, the temperature started rising again, and in 1850, the average global temperature rose far enough to 0. This is why all the graphs that all these politicians are coming out with saying global warming started in 1850. I'm sure most people are aware of the fairs they had the Christmas fairs they had on the Thames, where the Thames was frozen. It could only do that because we were in a mini ice age. The 1850 was the last time the Thames froze. So the temperature change we're undergoing at the moment is natural. Now, the temperature continued to rise from about 1800 up until 1995. Now, these are figures from the Meteorological Office, so they're official figures. So in 1995, the temperature started to level out at about +1.5. In other words, half the temperature it was under the Romans. Since 1995, the temperature stabilized at about plus 1.5 until 2000. So in 2000, global temperatures actually started to drop. They haven't dropped by very much, but they are still dropping. Now that's going to change slightly next year in 2011 when sun activity picks up again, because we've been in a period called monde minimum for the last few years.
We just had a solar flare.
Which is showing that sun activity is starting to pick up again.
What about the influence of the solar flares?
The solar flares don't influence the temperature greatly. It's the overall activity of the sun that influences the temperatures. And the sun has actually been very quiet over the last few years. But it's set to start up again next year, and it's all part of the process of helping us through this change. We need the temperatures to be warmer, and we need the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere to be warmer, to be higher than they are at present. Man-made carbon dioxide produces about 25 million tons of carbon dioxide a year. The Earth produces, on average, 980 million tons of carbon dioxide every year. So how can man-made carbon dioxide have an influence on the temperature when we're producing less than 1% of the total carbon dioxide? And the other thing to remember about temperature charts is that all the ice cores that have been drilled to monitor temperature change shows that the carbon dioxide levels follow behind temperature change. In other words, the temperature goes up and the carbon dioxide levels don't go up until quite some time later. So carbon dioxide does not cause temperature change. Temperature change causes rises in carbon dioxide.
It's as simple as increased plant activity
everything. The biggest problem with the mini ice age was that people starved to death. We couldn't grow enough food. I mean, in Britain, you could have snow showers in July anywhere from the Midlands north. So we just couldn't grow food. So malnutrition was a massive problem. Most people died of malaria. So this claim that rising temperatures would mean that more people would die of malaria is complete fabrication. More people died of malaria in Britain because of malnutrition and freezing temperatures than have ever done because it was warm. I think most people are becoming aware of the Anunnaki and the Anunnaki story. A lot of people are picking up on Zecharia Sitchin's translations of the cuneiform clay slabs that tell the Anunnaki story, which is essentially that humans were made by the Anunnaki as a slave race. It's gaining more and more prominence. More and more people are becoming aware of Sitchin's translations on the Anunnaki story. And there's also an awful lot of channeled material out there, and a lot of websites containing channeled material saying that the Anunnaki are here to save us. Organizations like the Galactic Federation, Ashtar Command, Big Great White Brotherhood, organizations like this are Anunnaki, essentially. They're set up by the Anunnaki, and they're here to deliberately mislead us. And the way in which they are doing this is they are using a basic human knowledge that we are undergoing some kind of change on the planet. And what the Anunnaki are trying to say is that we are ascending to the fifth dimension. Now, this whole concept of ascension is an Anunnaki word, and this idea of the fifth dimension is an Anunnaki concept. It has nothing to do with what is really happening on Earth. And it is all done to mislead us, to try and make us believe that the Anunnaki are actually our gods. They are our creators. And that is not true. It is totally against everything that human history is all about, human aspirations and human potential are all about. The Anunnaki are trying to remove people from the planet as much as possible, and this is what this whole thing is about. The other process they're using, of course, is the religious concept of the second coming of Jesus. So we have this The Christ consciousness returning is something which is spoken about a great deal. And this Christ consciousness is personified by an Anunnaki who calls himself Sananda, or to give him his full title, Lord Sananda. Now, if this being is an ascended consciousness, the highest level of consciousness that you are able to achieve within this universe, why would it have an ego that requires the title Lord? And also the Vilon or the Anunnaki is saying that Sananda is a word that means the ascended Christ. Now, this is just deliberately done to mislead, to make people believe that the Anunnaki are our makers, are our gods, whatever it is, and they are working and have been for a long time working in conjunction with the Illuminati. And the Illuminati control governments and worldwide organizations, worldwide corporations. All of these are attempting the same thing, to dampen down our ability to change. Because what is really going on is that we are not ascending anywhere, we are staying on Earth. What we are doing is bringing the higher self, the other part of the soul, into the physical body. We have to try and remember or understand that we are not a body that has a soul, but we are a soul that has built for itself a body. And what we are doing in this lifetime, before 2012, is bringing the whole of the soul into the body, so that we fulfill the potential that all of us has. And that potential means we can do things like translocate. In other words, we can just think ourselves somewhere else on the planet and take the body with us. We can communicate with wild animals. We can communicate with all living things psychically. We can communicate with each other psychically. That is what the end of the Mayan calendar is all about. It's not the end of the world. It is the end of human existence as we know it, because we are becoming so much more than we even believe possible. And there are already over 4.5 million people on the planet who have achieved this process. Everything that is going on at the moment is stopping everybody else, that's you and me, from undergoing this process of change. And that's what it is all about. It is a deliberate attempt to mislead us. So what we need to do is to remember who we are and what our potential is. Just imagine being able to walk around, to be able to travel to any country just by thinking that you can do it, and then, let's say, communicating with the tiger cubs, playing with the tiger cubs. Anything like that we will be capable of. But the way in which we achieve it is actually very, very simple. We're not being lifted off the planet by any kind of alien race in spacecraft. We are not ascending anywhere. We are not moving to a fifth dimension anywhere. We are staying firmly footed on Earth. And the way in which we achieve staying on Earth and bringing the whole of the soul into the body is very, very simple. The best way to protect yourself through this whole process is to go through the process, essentially. Because the more aware you are, the more psychic you are, the more soul you have within the body, the more aware you are of other people's intentions and other people's actions towards you and towards the planet. And therefore, by undergoing this process of reintegrating the soul into the body, you become far stronger than you ever believed possible that you could be, and you will be able to protect yourself from anything that comes in. I think one of the TV channels aired a questionnaire that they carried out of what people feared the most. And the top answer was, the number one answer out of this survey was that people feared most coming under psychic attack. And as far as psychic attack is concerned, the more that you take in of your higher self, the more able you are to deal with problems like psychic attack. Very, very few people actually do come under psychic attack. You need to go out and do something. that makes you noticed on a psychic level. And so if you're not acting on a psychic level, the chances of coming under psychic attack are very slim. So the best thing you can do, anybody can do to protect themselves, is essentially to undergo this process of change. Once we undergo that process of change, we are essentially invincible. Nothing can touch us. No disease, no illness, no psychic attack, nothing, unless we wanted to.
Many thanks indeed, Chris, for your time.
My pleasure.
And good luck and God bless.
I'll drink to that.